The stallion stood atop a small rise in the steppe, his mane blown sideways by a restless, uneven wind. Late afternoon light lay flat across the land, turning the brittle grasses pale gold. In this season, clouds should have begun to thicken across the western horizon, pulled inland by predictable cycles of warm air. Even the cattle herders who lived miles away relied on these skies. They knew when the air changed, when moisture crept in, when the steppe prepared itself for the brief but necessary rains. Today the sky was empty, wide, open, vacant. Not a streak of white, not a wisp gathering momentum, just a vast, silent bowl of washed-out blue. The stallion flicked his ears forward. He knew this land as well as he knew the tremor of his own hooves. He sensed shifts long before they reached the ground, pressure changes, temperature drops, distant thunder that travelled through soil and bone. But today there was nothing to sense. He stamped the earth lightly. The ground beneath his hooves should have carried a faint vibration, the tick of insects burrowing deeper, the subtle settling of the soil preparing for moisture. Instead, the ground felt hollow, as if waiting for a signal that never came. The herd grazed behind him, mares clustered around foals, heads low over dry stems that cracked between their teeth. The foals lifted their heads occasionally, sniffing the air. They felt it too, the strange stillness overhead. Every summer, clouds assembled in slow processions, first small puffs, then long bands, then dark-bellied towers rolling inward from the west. Rains didn't always reach every valley, but the sky always tried. Now the sky did nothing. A marmot popped out of its burrow nearby, blinking wildly. It scanned the horizon, confused. Normally, marmots sensed weather shifts before horses did, retreating underground when humidity rose or storms approached. But now its body language was frantic, because the air told it nothing. The stallion descended the rise and walked toward the herd, muzzle brushing a young mare's shoulder. She snorted, unsettled. The wind smelled wrong, dry in a way that felt scorched, as though stripped of all moisture, thinner than usual. Even dust kicked from hooves floated oddly, refusing to drift upward into familiar patterns. A crow landed on a dead tree stump and gave a low, rasping call. Another crow soon joined it, then another. They faced the sky as though waiting for clouds to tell them where the next storm line would form. Crows could forecast weather with eerie accuracy. Today they simply stared upward as if searching for something lost. Far to the east, dust rose. Human riders. 3 mounted herders approached at a careful trot, their silhouettes wavering in the heat haze. As they neared, the stallion lifted his head higher, testing their scent and the subtle tremor of hooves on the hard ground. The men halted near the herd. One shaded his eyes, looking at the sky. "Still nothing?" asked the oldest. "Nothing," the younger replied. "Barometers steady, too steady." A third rider spit into the dry grass. "It's the 4th day. By now we should see at least a veil of cirrus." The older man dismounted, crouched, and grabbed a handful of soil. It trickled through his fingers like dust. "Ground's waiting," he murmured, "but the clouds aren't." The stallion watched them curiously. Humans talked too loud, but sometimes their tones echoed the truth. Today their voices carried the same tension he felt through his bones. A gust of wind swept across the steppe. The grasses bent, their shadows trembling. But the sky did nothing. No response. No condensation forming along warm currents. No swirling fragments at the horizon. The stallion trotted toward a dried-out riverbed, remembering a place where shallow water usually pooled even during the driest spells. He descended into the cracked channel, nostrils flaring. Only a faint trace of moisture lingered in the soil, not enough to drink, but enough to cool the air slightly. He scraped at the earth with his hoof. A thin layer peeled away, revealing nothing beneath but more dry soil. A lark fluttered down beside him. It hopped along the ground, searching for insects that usually surfaced before weather shifts. But the soil offered no movement, no hidden life rising toward moisture that wasn't coming. The bird hopped once more, then flew away quickly, unsettled by the emptiness. The stallion lifted his head again. He tasted the air. Where clouds formed, the air always carried faint signs. Coolness, density, softness. Even the smell changed, from dusty heat to something cleaner. Tonight, the air smelled barren, perfectly dry, perfectly still. He returned to the herd just as the sun began to sink. Normally, sunset skies revealed thickening shapes, long bluish shadows rising above distant hills. Instead, the sky remained blank, a faded canvas with no paint. Foals pressed against their mothers. The mares circled tightly, as if uneasy without atmospheric guidance. The herders lit a small fire on the ridge. Orange sparks rose into the air, then simply stopped, hovering for a second before falling straight down. No updraft, no thermal pull. One man whispered, "The air's broken." Night came slowly. Stars appeared clean and sharp without a single cloud to scatter their light. The stallion stood vigilant, his silhouette stark against the metallic sky. Not once did the air shift to indicate forming moisture. The horizon remained dry and silent. By midnight, dew should have begun collecting on the grasses. Instead, the blades stayed brittle, bending with dry clicks under his breath. He realized then the steppe wasn't waiting for clouds. It had been abandoned by them. If the clouds would not gather tomorrow, or in a week, or in a season, the grasses would fail to seed, the burrowers would lose humidity shelters, the birds would lose wind guides, the predators would lose cover in storms, the soil would fracture into dust beds, rivers would shrink into memories, and the herds, wild or tended, would walk across a land that no longer recovered between suns. The stallion pawed the earth once, listening for any answer in the sky above. But the sky stayed blank, indifferent, motionless, and the steppe beneath him whispered nothing but the brittle crunch of grass under a world that refused to gather clouds. By dawn, the steppe felt even more fragile. The stallion sensed it before opening his eyes. The air pressed flat against his skin. Not warm, not cool, simply motionless, denying the subtle fluctuations every living creature relied on to understand the day. Normally, mornings arrived with a soft atmospheric pulse, moisture rising invisibly, insects stirring, grasses releasing faint dew. Today the air felt as empty as the sky. He rose, joints cracking softly. Around him, the herd stood in a loose cluster, their bodies tense. The mares flicked their tails, not at flies, there were fewer than usual, but at a restless discomfort none of them could place. The foals were the most confused. They nudged their mothers repeatedly, expecting the cool morning air that signaled feeding time, but the warmth of night had not dissipated. The steppe held heat awkwardly, as if unsure where to send it. The stallion walked toward his lookout ridge from the previous day. His hooves struck the dry earth with dull thuds. Even the sound felt wrong, sharper, carrying farther than normal across the still atmosphere. When he reached the ridge and looked west, his breath hitched. The horizon was the same as yesterday, colourless, sharp, and cruelly open. The kind of sky that should precede a severe drought, except drought skies still wore traces of cloud seeds, particles drifting, humidity trying to rise. This sky wore nothing. No haze, no building shapes, no vapour trails, no movement. A kestrel hovered nearby, wings fluttering lightly, and the stallion realised something alarming. The bird wasn't catching wind. It was fighting still air. Kestrels relied on microcurrents to hover in place, riding invisible lifts. But the air beneath this bird refused to rise. Its wings beat harder, too hard, a strenuous motion that should have been unnecessary. Finally it gave up, wings folding inward as it glided down to a fence post. Its eyes swept the barren sky in sharp, jerky motions. The stallion trotted down the slope, tail swishing with agitation. By the time he reached the herd, human riders were approaching again, this time with trucks parked farther away, metal equipment glinting in morning light. Their horses snorted at the unfamiliar machines, but the herders kept them calm. The men dismounted and met near the center of the plain, voices low and wary. One checked a handheld device. Humidity is stuck at 20%. It hasn't shifted in 36 hours. Another squinted at the sky. No pressure change either, completely static. The third man, the oldest, stared toward the west, his brow furrowed. I've lived 60 years here. I've never seen a sky that refuses to build clouds. The stallion stepped closer, listening. The youngest herder kicked at the ground. Soil's too warm. Heat should have lifted off the surface by dawn. The oldest placed his palm on the earth. When he rose, grains of dust clung to his hand like static. No ascendance, he murmured. No convection. The stallion flicked an ear. He didn't understand the words, but he knew the meaning. The sky wasn't breathing. A sudden rustling startled the herd. A line of steppe birds, sand grouse, erupted from the grass. They flew low, wings beating unevenly. These birds normally ascended smoothly, carried upward by early thermals. Today, the air gave them nothing. They flapped harder, slower, rising only reluctantly. Then something stranger happened. A dust devil formed in the distance, thin, weak. Normally, dust devils rose and twisted, climbing skyward in spirals. But this one remained flat, its column unable to rise more than a meter before collapsing. Its dust spun horizontally instead of upward, as though even chaotic wind refused to gather in the vertical direction. The horses snorted and bunched together. The mare closest to the stallion pressed her muzzle into his side. Her skin twitched. The air was too still, too close. The stallion lowered his head to graze. The grasses tasted dry, brittle, lacking the faint moisture they should have drawn from overnight humidity. He chewed slowly, listening to the ground through the tremors in his jaw. Even the insects underground were quiet. No soft shifting, no morning chorus. A dragonfly drifted through the air, gliding over a patch of cracked soil. Dragonflies were strong flyers, capable of navigating any breeze, but this one looked lost, confused by the absence of current. Its wings beat hard, but its body wobbled in a strange directionless path. The herders turned back toward their equipment. One pointed to a tall metal pole he'd staked into the earth. Anemometer reads 0. He frowned. But I feel wind, weak but present. Another compared two devices. We have breeze at surface level, but nothing above 1 meter. The air refuses to rise. The oldest man looked at the stallion and the herd. Animals always know first. He wasn't wrong. The stallion felt pressure in his chest, not pain, but the absence of something expected. A stillness that pressed from outside instead of inside. The mares were restless, stamping, shaking their heads. The foals stayed close to adult bodies, trying to interpret danger without having words for it. By midday, the sun hung mercilessly in an unbroken sky. Temperature rose sharply, but the heat didn't disperse upward. It stacked. The ground exhaled warmth that went nowhere. The air shimmered at ankle height. Higher up, nothing moved. The stallion lifted his muzzle, exhaling sharply. His breath dispersed quickly near the ground, but above, no wind carried it away. A prairie falcon soared overhead, or tried to. It circled once, twice, wings tight, then abruptly dropped altitude because the rising air currents it depended on simply weren't there. It landed heavily on a large stone, panting. The steppe had turned into a flat bowl of unmoving heat beneath a sky that refused to gather even the smallest cloud. By late afternoon, plants began to show stress. Some curled at the edges, others drooped unnaturally. The stallion walked among them, sniffing. The smell of vegetation was too intense, concentrated, trapped near the ground because air wouldn't rise to lift scents away. Sharp, dry, suffocating. He walked back toward the ridge. Still no clouds, not even the faintest smudge of moisture. If clouds would not gather tomorrow, or in a week, or in a season, electrical storms would fail to form, pollination patterns would break, temperatures would swing dangerously, migratory birds would lose navigation cues, plants would fail without shading cycles, predators would overheat on hunts, and the steppe, a land dependent on atmospheric rhythm, would dry into a brittle skin stretched over exhausted soil. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, turning the grasses red and bronze, the stallion stood tall on the ridge again. He scanned the empty sky for a sign, any sign of forming clouds. The sky offered nothing, no movement, no promise, no breath. And the stallion realized, with a heaviness deeper than instinct, the atmosphere above him was broken, not angry, not storming, not silent, just refusing to gather its own sky.